Welcome, everybody. Nothing like a little David Bowie to get us started. I'd like to welcome everyone to our fourth World of Work webinar. My name is George Schneider, and I'm a summer law student at Founders LLP. And World of Work was launched with the aim of being a central meeting place, whether in person, virtually, or online, for people looking for information, contacts, and networks on all aspects having to do with the workplace through both online content and various events. The idea for these webinars is that we have three people from different organizations with different positions and ideas within those organizations to speak on different topics, all within one centralized theme. We would love feedback on both this webinar and ideas for future topics, and we will be posting our contact information for all the presenters, both throughout the presentation and as well as at the end. If you have any questions for the presenters, please feel free to type in to the chat box that's on the right-hand side of the screen, and we'll try to have those questions answered. We're very mindful of the time, so if we don't get to the questions today, we'll get them addressed through email. So without any further ado, let me introduce you to our first presenter. Kelly Lipnicky is the Talent Attraction Specialist at Jobber, and Kelly is going to talk about recruiting during these most challenging times of living through a pandemic.
Thank you. Oh, yes. Hi. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. I'm really excited to speak to you today, as there's no doubt that the pandemic has forced almost every organization to rethink their interview process and to, how to provide a great candidate experience in the virtual world. I've been with Jobber for over 2 years now and been working as a member of our talent team since September of last year. At Jobber, we help small businesses be successful and bring people and technology together to build stronger communities. Our software helps automate the day-to-day work for those small businesses, including invoicing and quoting. With me being a member since September, this means I've actually only recruited in a virtual setting. It's been months of trialing what works, what hasn't worked, and what the future of hiring may look like, as many organizations like Jobber will be moving into a hybrid working environment in the upcoming months. So what makes a good candidate experience, set apart from a great one? There's definitely no one size fits all across recruitment, but there are a few pieces that I've seen success with that you can implement that'll not only set your candidates up for success, but your team as well. So the three areas of focus are going to be interview training for your hiring panel, service level agreements for your recruitment team, and resources for your candidates. Next slide, please. Thank you. At Jobber, we haven't reinvented the candidate experience by any means, but what we have done is committed to more training and more resources for the company to ensure each and every candidate receives the same experience from first touch point to first day. A large part of the training that we provide is calling out potential bias leaks. Within the virtual world, there are new biases that will come out now that candidates are logging into an interview rather than coming into our offices. They may have children running around in the background, partners working right beside them, dog walkers popping up, just to name a few. I'm sure you've all heard of the incident with the movie director not wanting to give an actor a role due to the size and state of his apartment earlier this year. And even worse, he made mention of this during the interview when he thought he was on mute. Not the best experience. So this is probably what you should not do. You want to give these, call these out, and also provide your candidates with tools to help navigate any anxiety they have in these spaces. So this can be providing a virtual background and an email prior to the interview, as well as alternatives to videos, such as just calling in. Alongside potential bias leaks that come out of candidates' physical space is also biases around their tech abilities. Oftentimes, hiring managers or panelists within the tech realm, like at Jobber, will evaluate the candidate's comfort with video software such as Zoom. Even though your company may have been working virtually in the last year, doesn't mean your candidates have, and doesn't necessarily mean they use the same software. At Jobber, we use Zoom, but I know many organizations use Google Hangouts or Microsoft Teams. So all of them will have their own functionalities. So it's always great within that interview training piece to call attention to this leak, but also help them reframe sort of the potential virtual fumble that could happen. Ultimately, tech issues can and will arise. So these will just help you give insights on how they may navigate ambiguous situations or get through sort of a challenging time, as these will all happen in a new role. Next slide, please. A positive thing that's come out of the shift to virtual interviewing is definitely accessibility. It's now easier than ever for candidates to interview because things like travel time or taking days off work are no longer needed. On the flip side, this also means less commitment from the candidates and more potential for them to fall off. For example, they may have the ability to leave in the middle of your interview or not show up at all. At Jobber, we've had a few candidates, and one, did hang up in the middle of the call. When we reached out to them, they let the team know that they felt their anxiety spiking, and they decided to leave the interview. So how do you mitigate the chances of these situations from happening? More transparency with your candidates and quicker service level agreements for your team to commit to. This can be done a number of ways, like providing an overview of your interview process on your careers page and walking through your candidates once again in the call. At Jobber, we commit to a number of SLAs for timelines. First is how long it'll take from first call to offer in hand. We have 3 steps after a phone screen, which includes a behavioral interview, a functional interview, and a call with a member of our executive team. We're able to complete the process and give an offer in under 3 weeks. As well, we commit to responding to all candidates, whether they're successful or not, in under 5 business days for each stage. As I mentioned earlier, interview is far more accessible these days, so folks can now take more than 1 interview per day. With quicker SLAs, you'll be able to speed up the process if you need for those top candidates that you don't want to lose in the process because they may be further along with another organization. Keep in mind, the start date doesn't necessarily need to be adjusted, as most candidates are just looking for the security of an offer in hand. Finally, my last piece is, let's talk about resources for your candidates. I briefly touched on virtual backgrounds and alternative ways to dial in, but there's so much more you can do to help them through the process. At Jobber, we provide a how-to guide for all our candidates, and this includes video etiquette, how to create a Zoom account if you've never done one, the lighting you may want, or ways that you'll position your camera. We're no longer able to welcome candidates to the interview with, say, a handshake or use body language to indicate support, so you can use these tools to accomplish that virtually. This supportive approach will give them insight into your company culture, as we know that that's one element candidates have cited over the past year as being a challenge to do over video. Additional resources that help prep candidates for an interview is actually just a literal list of resources on your organization. Each one of our recruiters at Jobber has links in our signature that gives more insight into Jobber, which includes recent articles written about the company, the awards we've won, just to give some insight into, more about us. These can help alleviate, any pre-interview jitters, but also give them confidence going into that first call. The last thing before I pass it over is, what hiring might look like in the future as we move towards more of a hybrid working environment. It's still an ongoing discussion with my team, but we've started to ask ourselves, will physical space versus virtual space breed different relationships with potential hiring managers and candidates? Should we keep things fully remote, or should we allow them to go into the office if they'll be working there in the future? None of these have been fully answered for us, to be honest, but we recognize that each candidate will be different. Their experiences, their situations will be different. So we'll be looking at providing a variety of options for the candidates to choose from along the interview process. Yeah, that's it for me.
Okay, thank you so much, Kelly. That was so informative. We really appreciate you being here. Our next presenter is Alexandra Sabo. Alexandra is an employment and labor lawyer with George Waggett Professional Corporation in Toronto, and she will be speaking about temporary layoffs, constructive dismissal, and the infectious disease emergency leave.
Awesome. Thanks, George. Yeah, so my topic might be a little bit more dry than what Kelly just spoke to us about. Kel, that was awesome. Thanks so much. So there's a lot going on in this space, because obviously COVID-19 saw many employers having to make drastic workplace changes in order to adjust to the realities brought on by the pandemic. And in some cases, that meant that employers are going to temporarily lay off employees, whether that was to relieve some financial stress, or perhaps their workplace was completely shut down by the government mandated shutdowns. So this was really seen across all industries and workspaces. I actually saw this article in the Law Times a couple of weeks ago that said during the pandemic, temporary layoffs had gone up by 1,000% during the pandemic. They weren't that commonplace beforehand, as you'll kind of see why as I get into it. But that's obviously still a big adjustment. And just for the sake of clarity of what I'm about to say next. So in ordinary times, under employment law, a layoff, even if it was just meant to be temporary, may result in what's called constructive dismissal, if if it is not allowed by the employment contract. And constructive dismissal is where an employer will make a significant change or a fundamental change to a term or condition of employment without the employee's consent, at which time the employee would then resign within a reasonable amount of time. I know this might be a bit nuanced and confusing. Constructive dismissal in general is a very confusing kind of portion of the law. So I'll try to make it as clear as I can as I go on. But as George mentioned, feel free to get in touch if anything comes up that you're confused on, or if you're looking for any advice. So in response to all of these layoffs, well, allegedly in response, the government made a regulation under the Employment Standards Act entitled Regulation 228/20, Infectious Disease Emergency Leave. And I'm going to refer to that as the IDEL, IDEL regulation moving forward, just so that I don't have a mouthful every time. So with this regulation, with the IDEL regulation, employers were then allowed to temporarily cut an employee's hours and pay or give them no work without it being counted as a temporary layoff. This is in direct result of the COVID-19 pandemic and would only apply during the COVID-19 period. So I've listed section 7.1 of the IDEL on the slide just to make it a little bit more clear. And basically what it's saying that if these employees were temporarily laid off, it does not count as constructive dismissal, and rather these employees would be on unpaid leave, if you will. But since this passing, and more so in the past couple of months of 2021, there have been 3 separate challenges that have made their way to the Ontario Superior Court of Justice that challenge whether or not the IDEL does actually take away an employee's common law right to sue their employer for constructive dismissal. So I've listed these 3 on the slides. For the sake of our timing here, I'm not going to go through every single fact of the case, because there's a completely different set of facts for each case. But I will instead address exactly how the IDEL regulation plays into it, and then at the end kind of go through any takeaways or potential takeaways, I suppose, for employers. So the first decision that we were given with is Catino and Ocular Health Center. As I said, there's a lot of kind of crazy facts here. There's some infighting with the employer, but the only fact that you need to know is that Catino was ultimately laid off during the COVID-19 period. Her employer let her know that she was going to be on a temporary layoff. She inevitably decided to come back and sue her employer by stating that there was nothing in the Employment Standards Act or the IDEL regulation that would take away her common law right to pursue a claim for constructive dismissal, a civil claim. And the court ended up deciding that she was right, that it did not affect her rights to sue under common law for constructive dismissal, and that she was entitled to treat that temporary layoff as bringing the employment relationship to an end. Therefore, that would immediately invoke her right to sue for constructive dismissal. So this confirmed that the employer was not protected by the IDEL against any potential claims for constructive dismissal, unless it was mutually agreed upon, such as in an employment agreement or contract, or for another valid legal reason. But when this case came out in the employment law world, this was seen as quote unquote a win for employees who were felt that they were wronged due to the temporary layoff. The next decision that came out is Fogelman and IFG. This case included a lot of legal analysis outside of the IDEL regulation and COVID-19, such as if proper consideration was given to Mr. Fogelman when he was provided with a new employment contract, etc. So I won't go into those, but this was an interesting case because Mr. Fogelman was actually laid off outside of the timeline that was prescribed in the regulation. But the court decided to take it upon themselves to examine what would have happened if his layoff did fall within the IDEL regulation. So this decision ultimately fell in line with the earlier Catino decision. And it was found that the IDEL did not supersede any civil remedies that would be available to an employee at common law. So he had every right to pursue a claim, to pursue a constructive dismissal claim, again, if he would have been laid off during that period. So this aligns with the earlier Catino decision. Again, in the employment law world, this was seen as a win for employees and just really solidifying the initial Catino decision. But of course, just to keep things interesting, we have our third decision, which is Taylor and Hanley Hospitality. And this is the outlier of the three cases. So I actually encourage anyone who has any interest in, employment law or this kind of area of the law to read the decision. It's fairly short, and the court in this case decided to look beyond what is actually written in the regulation and examine what the government was doing or what they had in mind when they created this regulation. And they emphasize that in exceptional situations, there needs to be exceptional measures. So they're saying that because COVID-19 is something so bizarre, so out there, the government needed a way to kind of level the playing field, if you will. And they recognize the inherent unfairness in subjecting employers to any potential wrongful dismissal claims that would have resulted or would have come up because of the government mandated shutdown or the government state of emergency. So they said that the IDAL does override the common law doctrine that a temporary layoff constitutes constructive dismissal. So this was seen as a win for the employers, if you will, because this means that the employers are allowed to hide behind the regulation. They are being protected. There is an inherent unfairness brought on by the pandemic where employers would be paying many out-of-pocket expenses that's likely not due to anything that they had done. And in the decision as well, the judge very pointedly or candidly points out that the Catino decision was simply "quote unquote" wrong in law. So it's fairly rare that you see a decision call out somebody's colleague from another area of the bench. So this was obviously a very intense statement saying the government did this for a reason, and therefore we are here to protect our employers. So where does this leave us? Ultimately, a little bit still confused because there have only been 3 decisions in this area of law, 2 for the employee, 2 for the employer. It's still fairly unclear as to what's going to happen in this area. And likely what's going to happen is one of these cases will go to the Court of Appeal and maybe even ultimately the Supreme Court. And in that case, we'll at least have a higher court decide what is correct. Until then, I think because I represent mainly employers and management side, so I tend to speak to employers on this as opposed to employees. Employers should continue to exercise caution between now and the end of the COVID-19 period, which will be in September. Well, as of right now, it's September 2021. But if it does come down to it and there is you find yourself in a case with where an employee is suing you for constructive dismissal, there is the opportunity to rely on the Taylor decision to bolster your defense for a constructive dismissal claim. We will be monitoring this at George Waggett very closely, and we do tend to post anything that we write on this to the World of Work site. So I encourage you to go to worldofwork.ca and keep an eye on there, or feel free to send me an email if a case may come up or a potential case comes up in this area, and we can talk through the facts and see what might be the likely outcome. So keep tabs on this, and ultimately we'll see where it goes from here. That's it for me. Thanks so much.
Okay, thank you, Alex. That's certainly a very timely issue and excellent for all employers to be aware of, and we'll all keep our eyes on decisions coming in the future. So our third and final presenter is Piper McGavin, and Piper is a summer law student at Founders LLP. And Piper is going to be speaking about how to be a successful candidate, the labor market, some job-seeking advice, and the pandemic pivot. So take it away, Piper.
Hi, everyone. So as George just mentioned, I'm going to be discussing recruiting and looking for a job from a candidate's perspective. So I'll be just kind of overviewing the Canadian labor market over the past 18 months, some quick tips for hiring in the virtual world, and then the phenomenon of the pandemic pivot and how now is a good time to be flexible with your skills and your career path. One more. So as we all know, both the Canadian labor market and the world's labor market has really suffered over the past 18 months during the COVID-19 pandemic. And as we can see from this graph, the highest Canadian unemployment rate occurred around April, May-ish of 2020. So in January of 2021, beginning off this year, the unemployment rate was at 9.4%, which indicated almost 900,000 fewer jobs for Canadians than in the previous February, right before the beginning of the pandemic. So the most recent labor force survey was completed in April, and that indicates that in April, the unemployment rate was at 8.1%, up from 7.5% in March. And this can be attributed to the third wave of the pandemic and increased restrictions across the country, including the stay-at-home order in Ontario. So employment has declined in both full-time and part-time work. The hardest hit sectors, as we could expect, are retail, accommodations, and the food services. Overall long-term unemployment is increasing, which is defined as being unemployed for 27 or more weeks. And this is mostly accounted for by those who lost their jobs in the second half of 2020 and remain unemployed. But to put a more positive note on it, things are getting better. As we see vaccination rates increasing, as the country and the provinces begin to open up, employers are hiring in previously unnecessary jobs, such as retail, food services, hospitality. And that will likely be reflected in the next labor force survey in the unemployment rate going down. So now I'm just going to do some quick tips for the job search right now. And the first one and the most major one is to both be patient and to put in effort. Recruiting is moving slower right now with lots of employers working virtually, having less access to their teams. So applying for a job, you might not hear back right away. So keep applying to jobs, keep putting in the effort, but be patient with the employers. They are also virtual and also struggling right now. And also, this is a time to expand your search. Obviously, it's important to look for positions that are related to your industry or your desired career path, but temporary jobs might be a smart move right now to add things to your resume, to be working at this time. And there are sectors such as services, logistics, and the health industries that are all quite busy and may have temporary roles available. And then also, right now is the time to really get into virtual engagement. So that could be attending webinars like this one, things you're interested in. That could be taking the time to update your LinkedIn to put your best foot forward for potential employers. You could also engage in networking events, put yourself out there, show that you're interested in a certain career path, because you never know what connection is going to be made. And as hiring increases again, you want to have those people you can call and connect with to show that you are open to applying to jobs. And then what comes with this virtual engagement is the dreaded Zoom interview. And obviously no Zoom interview will ever be as natural as an in-person one, but they are equally as important. And as Kelly talked about, employers are doing their best to make this an opportunity that a potential applicant can thrive. So there are some things to do to prep. So there's the obvious ones, such as dressing professionally and preparing as you normally would. But there's also a few extras. So for instance, work on your eye contact through the screen. Make sure that if you need headphones, they're connected, or if you can be in a quiet space. Make sure to familiarize yourself with the tech platform. You don't have to be an expert, but make sure you've logged on. And then there's also the opportunity that you can interrupt or be interrupted because of lags. So sometimes it's good to kind of, when you finish answering a question, give a nod, have a gesture, just to keep the flow of conversation as natural as possible. And then also, this is the time to address the current situation. So when you prepare questions for the interview, ask the employer, how has your job changed during COVID? How has the role I'm applying for changed? How have you supported your employees during this transition period? It's a great way to get to know a company. It also shows that you're aware that your role might be different than it would have been pre-pandemic. And then the last thing I'll be speaking about is the phenomenon of the pandemic pivot. So this refers to people taking the current labor market downturn as a positive moment to reposition themselves in their careers or to enhance their skills. So thousands of Canadians are taking the time to enroll in courses in their desired career path. So this could be getting an online certification that you can post to your LinkedIn. This could be attending webinars, as I mentioned. This could be taking a free Photoshop or Excel course, something that shows that you took this time to really improve your skills. Or you could really pivot. You could pursue something that you've wanted to do. You could get your real estate license. You could start your own business. This might be the time to really chase those things during this current downturn or maybe standstill. And then the other option that many Canadians are pursuing is taking the time to return to school. Canadian universities have seen a big spike in adult learners, so you're not alone if you want to get another degree or finish a degree, go in a completely different direction. So whether you want to do something small, like taking a course in your career path, something big, like totally switching what you want to do with your life, this might be the time to do it, and just know that there are lots of Canadians there with you. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much, Piper. That was excellent and so much information for us to keep in mind. I want to thank again all three of our presenters for an amazing and informative 30 minutes. Additional resources along with the webinar will be available online at worldofwork.ca. Stay tuned for the announcement of our 5th World of Work webinar, which will be broadcast in about a month from now. We'll post the information online once we have the exact date. Thank you all again, and thank you to everyone who's tuning in with us today. We hope to see you again sometime in August. Once again, I'm George Schneider, signing off.
Bye-bye. Thanks so much.